Hello and welcome to the latest edition of Citrus Bites from our offices in Sevenoaks. Well, this month it feels like after so many months of talking about lots of volatility and increases, I'm actually coming to you with a slightly different story. A fabulous guest today, but before we do get onto our guest, here's a brief economic update. And actually the update to start with when I look at interest rates is, well, it's relatively calm. So looking at the Bank of England, looking at the Federal Reserve in the US, and looking at the ECB, so the European Central Bank, all of them kept rates unchanged in their most recent meeting. And this has fueled a lot of speculation about, have rates peaked, for one? And second of all, well, if they have peaked, at what point are they going to start coming back down? So I'm going to take a very brief look from a UK perspective, because actually looking at inflation, which is the story I've talked about for many months, inflation at the moment was flat month on month for a year-to-date figure. So that's flat at 6.7. So the most recent reading was exactly the same as the month before. And in core inflation terms, there was a very marginal drop to 6.1 to 6.2. Now, the one thing I would say about the UK inflation numbers, which again we've talked about for a while, is just how the UK inflation compares to that of the G7. And the inflation rate in the UK remains stubbornly higher. In fact, from a UK versus US perspective, it's not far off twice the rate of the US inflation right now. And that's what can be seen in the UK. So why are we still, in spite of all the efforts, in spite of the rate increases, why are we still seeing that slightly stubborn inflation number? Well, probably a couple of different reasons, as I've been talking about for a few months. First of all, the labour market, so the employment market, that is still really, really tight in the UK, which of course many would argue is a very positive situation to be in, because good employment means that consumers have much more ability from a spending perspective and keep up with these bills that keep going up. What's helping the employment situation? Well, we know that vacancies are broadly flat. There's a slight reduction in the number of vacancies that are out there, but actually they're still they're still above the pre-pandemic position. So actually very positive. But we're also seeing continued strong average weekly earnings growth. So pay rises, if you like, are still running at a quite bullish. So I think 7.7 is the most recent annual reading when you look at the July to September period. So actually, from an inflation perspective, that's running really close with the inflation performance. So not eroding consumer power in terms of the pound in their pocket, because they're still getting that benefit through pay awards. And that just goes to show how tight the labour market is in the UK. Again, a story I've reported before. So actually, from that perspective, we're seeing very little change. We're still seeing quite a strong employment position. We're still seeing a strong average weekly earnings. So one would argue, when you look at the inflation position in the UK compared to the rest of the G7, actually, how likely is it that rates are going to see a decline in the near future? I would say probably unlikely at this moment in time, because a lot of the dials still remain very positive. So we then get to the situation, well, what might make a difference? And actually, for me, this links slightly to a question that's come in. So some of our viewers may have seen the recent webinar we did, where we were joined by Lindsay James, who's the investment strategist at Quilter Investors. And Lindsay talked about oil. So question here was, well, why does the price of oil matter? And why was it being talked about? Well, actually, when you look at the recent events, shocking events in Israel and Gaza, many economic predictions had oil, the price of oil. So let's call it Brent crude is one of the normal kind of typical prices that get talked about for a barrel of oil. The forecast, because of the input that the Middle East have in the production of oil, was that oil prices would see a significant jump, which is historically what's happened in the event of a crisis in the Middle East. So some of the predictions were $150, $200, even $250 for a barrel of oil. But actually, since the outbreak of the atrocities there, the price of oil has actually come off. It's gone down. Now, why does that matter, and why is it happening against all of these predictions? Well, one of the biggest drivers for the oil price coming down is the economic forecast in China. And China is something I talked about many months ago on Citrus Bites in terms of the hope around the Chinese economy reopening post-pandemic. And obviously that's quite in the past now, but it was very much hoped around this pent-up demand and what would happen in the Chinese economy. It hasn't really happened. And actually looking forward for the next few months, there's potentially less demand for oil in terms of what the purchasing is predicted to be over the next 3 months. So the softening potentially of the forecast in the Chinese economy, they are the second biggest consumer of oil. So from any country perspective, China are the second biggest consumer and the actual biggest importer of oil. So the softening of the price reflects the fact that the Chinese economy may not be as bullish as was previously expected. Well, why does it matter, Richard? Frankly, it might be the question. So that's all lovely, but what difference does it make? The biggest difference from a UK perspective isn't just the price of petrol at the pump, which impacts some people, others it doesn't, but many it does. But it's also about food prices. So food prices has been something that's been talked about for many months now, the cost of living, how much food is increased by. But actually, over 50% of our food requirements are imported. And how do those imports arrive in the UK? What does it take? Well, for a lot of those imports, it takes oil or petrol or fuel to get them into the UK. So a softening in the price of oil will help lead to a softening in the inflation rate in the price of food. And that will obviously make a difference from an inflationary perspective. And that's why, there we are, brief education today, but that's why it does matter. And that's why actually we may start to see, I know we started seeing some changes. I think dairy was the most recent one where there was a significant price reduction if you looked at an ongoing basis, particularly around cheese. But the price of oil does link to what we're likely to see in terms of food prices in the UK. So there we are. Oil currently running at about $82 a barrel, way off the forecast of potentially $150, $200, $250 a barrel, and actually down from September. So in September alone, it was just over $90. So definitely seeing a softening in the oil price and a brief reason as to why that's happening and the impacts that may have from a UK perspective. So there we go. That's probably enough from my economic indicators and story for this month. And now I'd like to introduce this month's special guest. Shona is the chair of the trustees and one of the 2 founders of the registered charity Friends for Families, which was set up in 2018. It's a local charity covering Sevenoaks district and Dartford and run entirely by local volunteers. Shona has lived in Sevenoaks for 27 years, so please don't be fooled by her Scottish accent. She's definitely local to Sevenoaks, and this is the place where Shona's lived for the longest period of time. Shona, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today.
It's an absolute pleasure to be here.
Some viewers may recall, Shona, that actually we worked alongside Friends for Families last Christmas. So it's really great that you're able to join me today to tell us more about the great difference that the charity makes within the local community, and obviously talk more about our aspirations for this year as well. So a good place to start, I suppose, is please can you tell us more about Friends for Families? You know, how did the charity start and why was it established?
Right. Well, it came about actually by chance. So for most of the time that I've been in Sevenoaks, probably for about 17 of the 27 years I've been in Sevenoaks, I have been a women's running coach, recreational running coach, and I had my own group. So I had a lot of clients. And every year we used to do something for charity, just as a Christmas, nice thing to do. In 2017, through a series of coincidences, I got put in touch with our local children's services. And they asked us if we could provide Christmas gifts for the most disadvantaged children in this area. And of course, we said yes, because, Christmas children, So we did. And it took us about 2 months to get together all the Christmas presents they'd asked for. And during that time, I was talking to the social workers a lot. And they were telling me about the conditions in which these children were living. And I had all the years I'd lived in Sevenoaks, I had not been aware that there is such poverty, Dickensian poverty in this area. And it shocked me. It really shocked me. So after we'd done the Christmas presents, we got to January 2018, and me and my runners, we were still talking about it. And we just decided you can't just say, oh, well, we've given them a nice Christmas present, not our problem anymore. So we set up the charity.
Wow. And I suppose you touched upon it, and I can't for one moment imagine how that feels when you do hear quite so much around the reality of how families and children are living. Because actually, when you think about Sevenoaks and when you talk about Sevenoaks, typically, the assumption is, well, it's a pretty wealthy area.
Yep.
So are there really many families that are suffering financial hardship?
See, this is the thing. So I grew up in the west of Scotland, and the poverty there is obvious. It's right under your nose. You can see it. Here, not so much, because the demographic here is completely different. It's a very comfortable area. You don't see the poverty, which is why I had managed to be oblivious to it for all those years. But it's absolutely out there. In Sevenoaks itself, it's hidden in little pockets. It's in particular areas of the district. Same in Dartford. So, I thought you might like some statistics. So, for example, in the most recent figures I've got for 21, 22, so in that year, 25.8% of children in Dartford were living in poverty, which is 7,533. So that's Dartford. You'd think Sevenoaks would be better, and it is, but not as much as you'd think. So in that same year in Sevenoaks, 21.8% of children were living in poverty, which is 5,467. And I've got those statistics from the End Child Poverty Coalition, which is a coalition of charities, so I didn't make them up.
And actually, just listening to you, thinking about the time frame, what are you seeing this year? Because actually, the cost of living, etc., everyone's feeling what's happened over the last kind of 12 months. So, are you seeing something even worse, to put it in that perspective, this year?
Yeah. So what happened was that we were finding that the level of need the first few years was reasonably constant. And then the pandemic hit. And so over 40% of the families that we help actually work, but they work in very, very low paid jobs, often in retail or hospitality. And in the pandemic, those were exactly the jobs that went. So during the pandemic, a lot of people who had been just managing lost their jobs, or their hours were reduced and could no longer manage. So we found that coming out of the pandemic, coming out of the lockdowns, there was a significant increase in need. And then on top of that, the cost of living crisis hit. And yeah, it's been absolutely, it's been dire, actually. What we've seen a lot of is, you see people in the press talking about people making choices between heating and eating. What we've been seeing is people who can't afford to do either. It's not a choice; they can't do either. So it's literally tipped people over the edge from struggling to get by but making it into destitution. And yeah, it's grim.
And I'm mindful that last year, and indeed this year, Shona, we were asking clients to help with board games. But maybe if we can just start with, what other events and fundraising do you do?
Right. So we are a tiny, tiny charity in terms of staffing, and we do that deliberately. So there are 6 trustees and 7 volunteers, and that's it. That's all there is. We have no paid staff. We don't have any premises. We don't, in fact, we don't own anything. We don't like have vehicles or anything like that. And we do that deliberately so that all the money that comes to us is spent on helping the families. We don't have our overheads are minuscule. It's mainly insurance and advertising. Because there's not very many of us, it's quite challenging for us to put on events. So we probably only do maybe 1 or 2 fundraising events as such a year. We've done like fashion shows and things like that, but it's not the big thing we do. The big thing we do in terms of fundraising is twofold. We are very lucky to be really well supported by the local community, and that's both individuals. We have a lovely network of local residents who basically, give us money every month. And we also are very lucky that there are local businesses like yours that are willing to support us and help us. And that is massive for us. About half of our income comes from local small businesses and local private individuals. And the other half of our income comes from grants from charitable foundations.
Okay. And so when you look at the funding situation, but when you're board games and donations, I guess one of the things that's, that typically gets asked is well, how do you make sure that these donations go to the right place, to the right people who really, really need them?
Yes, I'm really glad you asked that actually, because that is something we can be really confident about. So we work really, really closely with children's services. In fact, we do all our work in partnership with them. And the reason why we do that is because they are the experts. They are the trained professionals. So what they do whenever they have a new family referred to them, they will do a thorough assessment of the family's situation and establish why they are struggling in whatever way it is they are struggling. When they do that thorough assessment and they come to the conclusion that at least part of the problem is simple, straightforward poverty, income not being sufficient to meet their needs, and if they identify that there is something that would make a practical, concrete, and important difference to them that no statutory organisation can or will provide, they contact us. And that's when we step in. So we provide all sorts of things from children's clothes and shoes to basic furniture to food. We're very flexible. So that means that our work is done on the basis of an intimate understanding that children's services have of the family circumstances, which they then discuss with us. So that's what happens throughout the year. When it comes to Christmas, we then say to them, okay, so there's all these families that are on your caseload and that you've asked us to help with, or you're planning to ask us to help with a practical need. Now select the most disadvantaged of those and send us a list of those absolute, if you like, bottom of the pile, most disadvantaged families. And those are the ones that the Christmas presents will go to, because they are the people who literally can't afford anything. And those are the families whose houses children's services go into and find there are no toys because they can't afford to buy the children toys. So giving them something at Christmas is a huge thing for them.
Absolutely. And Shona, if somebody watching this, sat there thinking, actually, I'd really like to help, be involved now, how can they best be involved?
Well, I mean, it depends on what they'd like to offer us, but we are always really, really grateful for any offers of help. So basically, if anyone would like to get involved and help us, just get in touch. We have a website, friendsforfamilies.org, and if people want to just email through that, that'll get to me, and we can have a conversation about how they can help. And yeah, we love offers of help.
Perfect. Yes, thank you. Shona, listen, thank you. I'm going to come on to a couple of questions for you in a minute. I could spend, I think, way longer talking with you on this subject. And I guess at this stage, look, a thank you to our clients who made a difference last year, who are making a difference already this year. It is hugely appreciated. And of course, a massive thanks to you and the whole team friends and families for doing what you're doing.
Would you mind if Richard, sorry, I've just interrupted you. That's very rude of me. Sorry. Would you mind if I just said one thing about why the board games are so important?
Please do.
So the board games, I mean, we absolutely love that you do the board games for us. So like I say, these families are the poorest of the poor. They have very, very little at all. They can't afford board games because they're actually quite expensive, some of them. They don't have toys, they don't have games, they don't have anything really. So to give them a board game, that is something that the children can sit down and play with each other, and more importantly, the parents can sit down and play with the children, and the family can just sit and actually have some fun together, which when your life is a struggle from day to day doesn't happen very much. And consistently the reports that we get back from the families that have got the board games is that it was a wonderful experience to be able to sit down and play and laugh together as a family. So,
I'm really pleased you added that. Thank you. What a difference. Thank you so much. And right, Shona, I am going to ask you the question. So I know these questions fall in really strange ways sometimes. You have a particularly interesting one, which was set by Jonathan Raymond, the investment manager at Quilter Cheviot, which was, which asset or investment would you like to own for the next 12 months? And the options were equities, bonds, cash, or gold. I can explain those in any more detail if you want it, but so it's the way the question has fallen. I don't know if you can give any answer to that or choose your own.
Well, I would have to be completely honest with you and say that investment is not really something I know very much about. So if I were to be in a position to be making an investment, I would have to take advice from an expert, probably someone like you.
What a terrific answer, and genuinely we haven't rehearsed this, so love it. Thank you so much. And the benefit for you now is obviously you get to set the question, and again I can't tell you who next month's guest is going to be yet, but I'd love you to set the question for next month's guest, please. So over to you.
Wonderful. What I would love to know from your next guest is, what social policy would you like to see introduced in this country to reduce poverty and inequality?
Brilliant question. Thank you. I look forward to asking that to our guests next month. Shona, we're probably timed out at this point. To reiterate, thank you so much. Thank you to you and the whole team there for everything you're doing, and thank you to our clients for everything they're doing. Just listening to you and listening to the stories, but the difference things can make to individuals is quite humbling, and we're very grateful for people that do make a difference like this. So thank you so much, and thank you for your time today. It's much appreciated. Well,
we're more grateful than I can tell you for your support and that of your clients. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much. And we will report back. So Shona, if we may come back in January, we'll do a kind of review of how Christmas went, how we got on kind of year on year, and how you were able to make a difference. That would be fantastic.
Absolutely, yes.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. So that's it from this month's Citrus Bites. I look forward to seeing you in December for our final update of 2023. Take care. Bye for now.